All right, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. So first things first, this was meant to be Jackie and myself. Jackie is sick. She came back from vacation and brought the sickness back with the whole family. So I'm just going to be going through this stuff on my own tonight. It's fairly rudimentary, but we'll get into um, several other things. Like we'll spend a bit of time doing some brainstorming and stuff like that. The goal is to finish here around 8:30, so it should be around an hour. Okay, and everyone can see my screen. Okay, yes, the presentation.
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. All right, so we're going to do a check-in and some introductions in just a moment. Then we're going to look at the actual documentation, the paperwork form for the application. Then we're going to kind of quickly work through a kind of 5-step process. Then there'll be time for Q&A, and then just at the end of the presentation is my contact information. All right, so documentation, I did email the document out to you earlier today. I'm going to move mine over onto the screen so you can all see it. So there's a couple of ways you can access this form. You can simply email me or email the NYSTRA conference website email address, which is nystracon@gmail.com, or you can download it and the link is in the presentation. But otherwise, like I say, I did email this to everyone today. Steve, I know you joined late. Did you get a copy of this?
I do have a copy.
Okay. All right. And this is a fillable form. So all the gray boxes you can click on and fill out. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes, but just wanted to kind of make sure everyone was on the same page with that. All right. So before we go any further, I just want you to kind of turn your cameras on so we can see you, if that's okay. And then just say a little bit about why you're here tonight, what experience you have presenting, and if you presented before at the NYSTRA conference. Steve, camera is on, so I'm gonna go to you first, then Rebecca, then Dorothy.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Steve Schapp. I've attended and presented at the NYSTRA conferences in the past. I recently attended and presented with Jason at last year's conference. What else was I supposed to say?
I think that covered it.
Okay.
Rebecca?
Hi. I've presented at NYSTRA once for like a panel for students, and then I also presented at the SUNY Cortland conference that just passed. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And Dorothy?
Hi, I'm Dorothy. I have presented at the NYSTRA conference twice, and I'm excited to learn how I can improve for this year's conference.
Okay. So I should probably do the same, right? Turnabout is fair play. I think I presented at my first NYSTRA conference, I want to say 2013, maybe 2012, 2013. So I've done most of them since then. I don't know. I've presented lots of different conferences. So yeah, this is pretty standard. And when I set the presentation up, it was really with more of a process in mind. So you could certainly apply for NYSTRA, but you can also use the same process to apply for other conferences and take it from there. So that's that. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. We'll be talking a little bit more in a little while. All right, so I lent on Tuckman's Stages of Group Development for my theory of conference session planning. Because it is a process, even though most of the time, and so, Steve, you've done several sessions, like this isn't rocket science to you at this point. Often there are a couple of stages in here that really kind of hold people up. Mostly I would say the storming part, which I'll clarify in terms of this content in a little while. And even the performing still puts a lot of people off. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about around those areas particularly. We're going to walk through the paperwork and how to complete that. Again, most of you have kind of done this before, so for the audience right here, it's not going to be such a big issue. But maybe you can share some of your experiences and some of the questions you had so that people who are watching this maybe after the fact can get a bit of additional insight from you all as well. All right. So I'm going to work through each of these stages, kind of explain how they work in terms of not the group development stages as Tuckman planned them, but in terms of planning a conference session. And so first up is forming. And this is probably the weirdest one of the lot, and a whole weird tangent that I went on when I was planning this presentation. But this is the who, when, and where kind of questions, right? Before a conference session happens, there are things you kind of already think about. And often what happens is forming gets kind of smashed in and smushed up with the storming and trying to figure everything out. And I just kind of wanted to break them out a little bit so that people could be aware, like, these are the kind of questions, right? Are you going to present on your own, or are you going to present with someone else? You've all presented before, so let me ask you, which do you prefer? Do you prefer co-presenting or presenting on your own?
I guess I can go. I've done both, and I feel as though presenting with someone else is preferred. I like the process of developing with somebody else, and then also kind of feeding off each other's energy. And then if there's any clarifying of topics or points during the presentation, it's really, really helpful to have that second set of eyes and other folks to help. And I hate listening to me talk for an hour to an hour and a half. So.
Okay. Other thoughts? Dorothy or Rebecca?
Personally, like presenting alone because I'm just the type of person that's like, I'm in control of the situation type of energy. But when I did like the panel, it was also nice to hear like everybody else's point of views of like different questions that was asked. But other than like a panel, I guess because I've only presented by myself, that's kind of what I'm comfortable with. But yeah.
Okay. Dorothy?
I've only presented independently, but I would love to collaborate with anyone. So if anyone's looking for a partner, I'd be interested for the upcoming conference.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, it depends on the topic. Steve and I presented a few times on board games, of which he has far more knowledge than I do, so that's always good. Jackie and I don't know, we presented on a million and one things, and that's always very easy. And then I've presented with some people just like as a one-off, and it's sometimes hard to get the chemistry right. So Steve and I presented, we've co-facilitated groups before, so it's fairly, we're fairly comfortable doing that. But it can be challenging to partner with someone new for the first time, and trying to figure out that dynamic can be a little tricky. So it's kind of why this forming kind of part was in here, is like, are you more comfortable, as Rebecca is, presenting on your own? Are you more comfortable presenting with someone? Then, once you know which one, if you're going to present with someone, making sure that they're a good fit. Also, are they going to be available to meet for planning, or what time do you need for planning a session? This is a really important one. If you are going to work with someone, can they actually make it to the conference? I presented in Canada a few years ago, was meant to partner with someone to do that. And 2 days before the conference, they told me they didn't get a passport in time and they wouldn't be coming. So, these things happen, and you have to kind of plan around that, and just kind of, the best laid plans, things happen, right? Even tonight, like Jackie was sick, these things happen, right? But if you know in advance that they're just not going to be there, then obviously don't plan around them being there. Or if you know they're unreliable, right? Those are the kinds of considerations. And then the last two questions here are really more about what kind of conference you're actually presenting at, right? So who's your audience? I always feel like the NYSTRA crowd is pretty forgiving. They're usually a fun group. There are a lot of people who know each other, and so it's fairly relaxed. And that's very different to other conferences that I've been to. So like ATRA, depending on where they are in the country, the audience can change a great deal, right? Because if they're in Michigan, one year that's going to be a very different crowd to maybe being in um, Alabama, right? Because there's just going to be a different group of people there with different expectations. So kind of understanding that is important. Also understanding that if you're going to talk about content that's specific to New York, that's really great at a NYSTRA conference. But if you're going to ATRA, you need to also understand that that might be different in different states, right? So knowing who you're presenting to and understanding where the conference is, like, and maybe this might sound a little strange, but understanding the cultural differences between place. So working in substance use, which is very state-driven treatment, can be very different to working in the federal prison system where all of those that one system covers the whole country and people are talking the same language, as opposed to substance use treatment where people are talking very different, kind of using very different jargon, and just kind of understanding what that looks like to the majority of the people who are going to be at that conference. Any of you have anything to add on that, particularly to NYSTRA? I think that's NYSTRA, like I said, it's usually a fun conference. People are comfortable, they know each other for the most part, and I find them generally willing to participate. So kind of knowing that and building in those opportunities to join in is usually well received. All right, so storming is the next part. So we kind of know our audience and we know the conference we're going to, like those, like I said, really basic things, but they really do help with the brainstorming part. See, I didn't really stretch myself too much in fitting one model into the other here. Um, so these are the big questions, right? How many of you already have an idea for a conference session, like in your back pocket? All right, Rebecca, what are you thinking?
Um, I'm probably going to do what I did at the Cortland conference about horticulture therapy and incorporating that. So, yeah.
Okay, Steve.
I actually work for the New York State Office of Mental Health System, and one of the things that I think I find with even current employees that are within the civil service system is they don't understand what civil service is. It's a very like different language. So I've presented a couple times on the civil service system, and just kind of giving an overview and history of, and I feel like doing that every few years can be helpful, especially for students and folks kind of not knowing what it is and how to access it. And I think I'm about due to present somewhere for it. So
Cool. Dorothy, you had a kind of tentative hand up there.
Yeah, I guess depending on how the brainstorming session goes, I was considering conflict styles and how they can be used as a recreation therapist, both from the clinician standpoint with your patients and also either as an employee or a supervisor.
Cool. My dogs are upstairs running around, so I hope you can't hear them. Um,
Jason, just one more thing. I was talking to Jess Andrianos recently via email, and she said that there has been some, I guess, recommendations or folks wanting to know more about like trauma-informed practice and like de-escalation skills and techniques. So that was another thing that I guess was brought to the forefront. I don't know that it's something that I would present in the near future, but it might be something worth developing or maybe putting out to somebody that may be willing to look into it further.
was that a broad hint or?
I mean, you're not that busy these days, right?
Oh, no rest for the weary, right? Um, so actually that does bring me to kind of like the next question. So where do you get the ideas from? So I think we've already kind of summed up. So Rebecca, in your case, you've already done this presentation. Or when you originally planned that for the Cortland conference, where did that idea come from for a session?
So the idea came just from wanting to do a little bit more research about like horror culture therapy and their whole like organization, and I just like kind of like went into it, and I did a whole program at my job about like starting from like the beginning of doing a garden and then to the end point, and I had, you know, all these like pictures and like doing it, and some people were like, oh, like this is really cool information to learn about. So um it kind of just spiraled into wanting to start actually like doing more conferences, and I'm like, okay, if I can, I have all this information about plants, and it's also one of my really big passions, so I'm like, I want to start getting into doing conferences, so I'm like, this might be an easy segue into getting up there and like putting my name out there, I guess. So yeah.
Steve, yours came from a conversation, or the second idea came from the conversation with Jess. What about the civil service test?
It was kind of a conversation with a mentor that I had years ago, David Peppel. I don't know if you remember the name or not. And we had kind of a conversation around just getting people and some of our staff to the presentation tables for internships. And then just kind of conversation from there, just around civil service. And at the time, I was trying to understand it better. And I kind of made a comment about, well, if I'm having a hard time and I've been working in the civil service system for a few years, then I can just imagine what like people in school or fresh graduates are maybe struggling with as well. So we actually decided to present together at the Cortland conference in 2019. That was the original genesis of that presentation. But it just happened as a conversation amongst another professional.
Dorothy, what about your idea for conflict management and resolution?
Yeah, I just took a course on negotiation, and it was one of the subjects discussed, and just learning about it and figuring or learning more about like the tools and the interventions with like the 5 different conflict styles. I was like, oh wow, I really wish I knew this like when I was like supervising people, because I think it would have just been more effective to know different ways that I could meaningfully approach people and hopefully get better results.
Yeah. And so, going on a course, right? Advancing your own education and coming back and sharing that with the community as well. Um, one of the sessions that I'm going to be presenting is my newsletter from the NYSTRA newsletter. As I was sat writing that document, I was like, oh, this could really easily be a conference session, and we can talk about this kind of aspect of professional development. And the other one was just seeing a lot of ads and content on Facebook around like um, lifestyle gaming, right? And I'll talk more about that, and you'll see my submission in a little while. But the idea that we can gamify life, and tying back to that interest and having presented with Steve on games before, like how can we use these as therapeutic tools? And so that's the wonderful thing about these ideas. They can, if you're in the kind of space where you're like, I'm looking for something to do, that inspiration can find you, right? It's kind of like you have to be open to it for it to find you. But and I think that's kind of, I think a lot of people get hung up on this idea that they have to have this 100% rock solid idea before they can move forward. But sometimes it's really just about that chance conversation with someone, or, and just or um, you've done this program and all of a sudden people are giving you this really positive feedback, right? Those kinds of things doesn't have to be fully formed at this point. So, in terms of brainstorming, I don't know if we'll do too much of this, but this is one approach, one activity. But I do know, Dorothy, you wanted to do a little bit of brainstorming. So one way to do this is if you really don't have any start point, right? It's just to kind of talk about what your kind of professional interests are, what job you're doing, and those kind of really basic things. And it's top of the head stuff. So really just 30 seconds to a minute of like sharing. I like to, my interests are things like administration, right? And everyone automatically falls asleep. But I like deviant recreation. I enjoy talking about things like sexual health. Like those are my professional interests, right? And all of those lend themselves to um, a conference presentation. Um, Steve, um, I could do some of your stuff, but I don't know it all. So I'm going to ask you to do something very similar. Just kind of spend 30 seconds ish talking about your job and your professional interests.
Professional interests. I'm really big into kind of leadership concepts and topics, and development of staff and offering opportunities and finding opportunities. So I guess there's kind of a supervision, clinical supervision component, kind of how to work well with others from a disciplines perspective. Like how do I engage with another discipline at the hospital? And then also like trying to judge what the outcome should be. So I guess there's a component of like, what is the goal? Where are we trying to get to? And then trying to find the most efficient and effective way to get there. So sometimes that's applying technology and different media, and being open to those ideas because within the New York State system that can be challenging. Um, so even if it's just education around like using a specific technology like Office 365 or the Word, the Google suite of applications, sometimes it's just identifying what is the thing that is missing or what is the weak point that we're talking about within the group and then trying to address that so everyone can kind of come to a similar level.
Cool, thank you. So, Rebecca and Dorothy, you just listened to that. What questions do you have about what Steve just said?
I have feedback, not a question. I
Or
really
feedback?
was intrigued by the Office 365. Like I know like the joke is like whenever you do a resume, you always write proficient in Word, but I think as I guess a potential audience member, it would be interesting to learn like, any like what would the term be? Maybe like where administration and technology kind of intersect and how that can be applied to recreation therapy.
Good.
Yeah, no,
Rebecca?
that's valuable. I've gone and become an Office 365 instructor many years ago, so I
Oh.
have been trained to a degree. It's been a few years at this point, and it's evolved since then. But it is kind of a neat suite. There's a lot of things that are expanding and becoming more available. And SUNY Cortland uses, I think, Office 365 as well. So thank you.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback off of like the technology because I know like for my job, for example, a lot of people there are not really that tech savvy, and I'm usually because I'm the younger one, everyone always looked towards me for like all like technology stuff, but you know, implementing more of trying to like help people understand different types of like you know technologies to help with recreation and um doing all that would be really like helpful. Like I know like for my job and I'm assuming many other jobs too, there's always some people that aren't the best with technology, so like using that as a helpline to get people more into discovering there's so many more things you can do with the help of technology. So yeah.
Good, good. And so I think that the value of doing this is sometimes when we're doing our jobs, we don't think that anyone else cares. Like no one needs to know this because we know this, right? And so sometimes just being able to say, hey, this is something I'm interested in, and then getting that feedback from people saying, no, actually, I am interested in that too. It kind of gives you that, oh, okay, well, if someone's interested in learning, this is kind of like Rebecca's positive feedback on her program wasn't you weren't initially thinking about, oh, this could be a conference session, but once you start getting that feedback, it makes you kind of realize that, oh, actually, yeah, that could be useful. I could share this information. And I think that's a huge barrier for people is they don't think that what they're doing has value to anyone outside of their like immediate team or their program. And so just kind of like this exercise is worth doing, maybe with you know, a few other friends or colleagues or whoever, even the people you work with can be useful for this too, right? Especially if they're doing slightly different things. They may not know exactly what it is you're doing or what you're working on. So, Rebecca, I'm going to ask you to go next and do the same thing.
Um, I would, um, so like I'm still kind of new to the field. I've only been working at my job for actually this month 2 years. So I'm still kind of like learning what my professional like leisure stuff is. I mean, I would say like things that like I like to incorporate into like my programs that a lot of people are kind of like, I guess, like taken back from is the whole plants thing. That's one of like really like big successful programs. And also I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and I'm not a big music person. So I'm trying to incorporate more like music into it and learning about different like leisure education music programs. So I'm like learning like different things to like do. And when I do programs, a bunch of like my coworkers and colleagues are like, "Oh, I didn't know that we were learning this, and this from that." So um, I would probably say like incorporating new and stepping out of your comfort zone type of activities and um, saying like, "Yeah, like if you do this is the results that come out of it." So stuff like that.
Okay, good. Dorothy, what's your feedback or comment? Oh, Steve, did you want to jump in?
I mean, or Dorothy can go. It's
Oh, congratulations, Rebecca, for your 2-year anniversary at your work. That's wonderful. My feedback is I was struck by how you said, and I applaud you for stepping out of your comfort zone and for incorporating like music into your session. I think, just as again, potential audience member, one thing I was like, came to mind is how can you use music even like passively? Like, are there like benefits to that where it's something that regardless of like population or you work with that, like maybe just putting like music on in the background, whether it's like a physical activity or a cognitive activity, like, oh, are there benefits in that way you can include that in your treatment plans, like something that's simple but also creates benefits. Just a thought that popped in from your wonderful sharing.
Thank you.
I had a question around, what was the process or how did you settle on taking and expanding your kind of nuance of horticulture and then also wanting to learn more about and present music?
So, um, I have a very big plant collection at my home, and I one of the things that I've learned in school is taking your hobbies and making them into activities. And when you are very passionate about what you're doing, it's going to make a big input on your group. So I was trying to brainstorm a new big program that my job really wanted us to start doing. And there was always talks about doing plants and like a garden, but no one at my job really got into that. Like really didn't know how to start a garden. And we're in a day hab and I work with individuals with developmental disabilities and we just didn't have any room for a garden. Like so they were like, how can we even make a garden? And so I was like, well, there's all these other things. And so they're like, oh, well, you're knowledgeable about it. You can just do it. And I'm like, okay. So that's kind of like how like I started incorporating horticulture into my program and it's been really fun and the individuals really like it. Obviously right now because we're in January there's a bit of a lull in our gardening group, but we're starting to go back with it in hopefully March, April, start doing more and starting from scratch kind of. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess the reason I ask is there any components of the process, and it may even be how do you engage with your administrators or your managers on here's an idea that I have, how can we flesh it out, how can we develop it, and if there's any guidance that you would have to give for, budding professionals or students, and then also how might you apply that and generalize it to other activities, other settings, other things that you may be engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, so when my supervisors came up to me and kind of threw this idea at me, I was just, kind of like gun ho about it. And I started doing like my own research of like different things to like order. And I am part of like different Facebook groups for plants. um, and I reached out to those people and was like, hey, like if you have any things that like you don't use or is piling up and you want to donate them, and we're doing this, and this. If you want to donate, that would be really helpful. And actually, a lot of people from the community donated stuff to my program, and like pots and shovels and dirt and other different types of stuff. So it was really cool, and for administration to see that they really were like taken away, and they were like very happy with it. Um, so yeah, what was your other question? The other half. Sorry.
Just how you kind of settled on music as another intervention or something that you wanted to further research and develop.
Yeah. Before this job, I was working at a nursing home, and I worked with individuals with Alzheimer's. So we always played music there, and I kind of saw like the impact on music with them. And with my individuals now, a lot of them are older, so they're hitting like 60, 70, and music for them, like they listen to, their one karaoke song over and over and over again. So I was like, let me try expanding and making activities that we can incorporate music in. So one of our biggest things that we do is name that tune. So I would play a song from their decade, and they would have to guess the name of the song. And from then I would spark a memory with them, and they would like, say a little something about the song, where it's like, oh, my mom played this song, or something like that. And so then that came really, really well, and my supervisors really enjoyed that program. So I was like, okay, how can I incorporate more music into it without me having to play an instrument? Because I don't know how to play an instrument. I don't sing. I don't do any of that. So I've made some different activities that does incorporate me to having to do that, but and they're enjoying it. It's kind of trialing and error, and I just kind of like wanted to see how they would incorporate with music, because there's not a lot of people at my job that focuses on music and like makes them, you know, try that new leisure activity out. So I was like, I guess I'm gonna be the person to do it. So yeah.
Thank you. And I would say that's one of the good things about bringing a new concept or program to conference, because there'll be people in the room who have been teaching music or working with music for the last 20 years, and they'll have resources and ideas and input that can really help kind of move that your new idea to them isn't new. They'll just bring more to it and add another layer to it. Just before we get to Dorothy, Denisha, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right, good. Glad you could join us. We're gonna quickly finish up this exercise. Dorothy, um, yeah, a little bit a quick overview of your job and professional interests.
Yes. So, and this activity is so great because hearing everyone else speak it like prompted like, thoughts I want to flesh out. I remember when I first started, I primarily have worked with a geriatric population, and just the generational difference being like, I wish I could take like a crash course where I can learn everything about like, that era of their life, where like I could make like references they'll appreciate and like know it beyond a superficial level. And then having and helping staff who are again younger, who have no cultural touch point of like what it was like, what like who the singers are, who like what the movies, what the things the geriatric residents value. I was just trying to think like, is there a fun and creative way to maybe like bridge that generational gap? That was just one thing, just this activity and hearing everyone's experiences, triggered in my mind.
In my head, when you say that, sorry, I'm going to jump over everyone here and say I was thinking like Trivial Pursuit as a jumping off point. Like ask them a question about, um, what was the number one selling artist in the 1960s on the Billboard charts, whatever. But then that kind of, you have the group answer that question or figure out an answer to that question. And then you can kind of go on from that trivia to be like talking about the music of the 60s or whatever. So I think there are fun ways you could kind of do that. Um, but that's a really cool idea because we often don't think about that kind of like pop culture education. But when you're working with a generation that may be 2 or 3 removed from your own, that's a huge deal. Steve, Rebecca, sorry, Indonesia, if you have any feedback.
I kind of have feedback, if you don't mind. So when I was working at a nursing home, one of the activities that I would do is it's like I think it was a game, but you can definitely like like print out pictures and stuff like that. But you would type in like from their decade pictures of the TV or pictures of like an amusement park or whatever, and show like just like hold up the picture and it's like, okay, when you see this, what does this remind you of? you know and people, I when I did this game with the individuals, a lot of them would be like, oh, I remember watching this show on this TV, and I remember having to go up and having to press the button and changing the channel or fidgeting with the antennas, and then usually like with pictures it will like kind of like spark that memory a little bit, and then once they start talking, they kind of won't stop. But that's just the first thing that popped into my head, and that was very successful when it comes to like reminiscing about those types of things. And then with your staff who might not know that like difference, it might help them like just having the pictures, not having to like sit down and like talk about it. They can reference the pictures, and sometimes even those pictures, they might jog a memory in the staff's head of like, oh, my grandma had this, or whatever. So that's my feedback.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Steve or Denisha?
I guess just some feedback as well. I think that what I heard from you with regards to being able to shape presenting music to a group of people, I think is a very safe way to learn about individuals, and also what some similarities may be amongst the group. And I think group cohesion can be a very important thing, um, depending on the setting that you're in. So I think it's a really great way to kind of engage and interact with, and as you said, not just the persons in care, but also the staff and the employees.
Cool. Denisha, did you have any thoughts on what Dorothy shared?
No, I don't.
Okay. Would you like to just give a quick overview of your job and what your professional interests are?
Sure. So currently I serve in the hospital setting. I facilitate bedside recreation therapy. I also work at a treatment facility for at-risk youth, and basically at that agency, I run a creative movement group, which is basically focused on how creative movement can affect youth who have experienced complex trauma. So we have a good time with that. And what does it say? Yeah, so my my potential topic for presentation would be the benefits of creative movement in at-risk youth with complex trauma. and just the effects that I've seen in my line of work and how it impacts their confidence, um, their sense of self dignity, and their ability to just perform overall in life and academics. And it just kind of just giving them that space to be creative and express themselves really unlocks a lot of things in their lives that overall just improves their quality of life.
Awesome. So I have a question because I've never worked with a group that needed bedside recreational therapy.
Yep.
Um, so to me, that's like mind blowing,
Yeah.
right? So how does that, just in a kind of elevator speech style, how does that work?
Yeah, so basically in the hospital, I'm working with patients who could be in the hospital for a day or sometimes for months. And my job is to basically just to help them cope with being there, to process their emotions, to keep them busy, to get them involved in any positive activity. Sometimes patients want to do substance abuse counseling. They want to do relaxation therapy. They just want to sit and spend some time with you, playing some board games, maybe go walk to the hospital's garden. And so yeah, that's basically it. Basically just to help them cope while they're there and walk with them, do anything that they may want to process. It's awesome. I have a great time doing that.
So I'm going to ask this question to the rest of the group. How many of you are familiar with that kind of work?
I have a question. Denisha,
Okay.
did you present at the virtual conference?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, I saw your videos. You were brilliant, and more of that. I would
Oh
love to
yeah,
meet
thank
you in
you.
person. You're brilliant, so I'm a fan.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome.
So um, the bedside therapy, um, I'm sitting here listening to it, and it's like okay. I'm just thinking though the application of that kind of approach across
Mm,
programs. Um, like having worked with at-risk youth, where I have a resident who maybe doesn't want to get out of bed.
mhm.
Like, okay, how can I start engaging this person?
Yeah.
And in long-term care where we have similar situations, right?
Mhm.
So I think that there's interest in that kind of work, but it's a case of like, how can that apply outside of that kind of limited setting?
Yeah.
Um, but no, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And
No
yes,
problem.
I did enjoy your virtual presentation too.
Oh, awesome. That's so cool.
All right, I'm gonna move us forward. So we may come up with lots of ideas and kind of this is my nerd model of sorting through our ideas. I couldn't think of any, so it's just NRD. But anyway, there are near ideas, there are reachable ideas, and there are distant ideas. And so as we were going through those various kind of things, they were like, some of those ideas were like, yes, I have all of the things I need right now to do this. Right. So Denisha already has the skills and knowledge to talk about movement, and in the sorry, when working with individuals trying to develop post-traumatic growth, right? I already have all of that information. Steve was talking about crisis management, crisis intervention with the individual. I feel like that's a reachable idea. Like most of that stuff is already there. It just kind of needs a little bit more work. And then Rebecca's going to learn an instrument and she's going to add to her music group, right? And I feel like that's a distant idea, and you don't have to learn an instrument. Um, but it's not quite there yet. That program isn't fully formed. That presentation concept isn't quite there yet. You know where you want it to go, but the idea is just still a little bit too far out to kind of get to, right? And so this is kind of how I think about these ideas. And often when I'm doing a presentation, I'm often thinking like, what's the next presentation in line? So at Cortland conference, I did a presentation on dark tourism. Steve, did you come to that one? The Jack the Ripper, dark tourism.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not at all a therapeutic recreation session, right? That's a straight up recreation tourism session. But my next thing, this kind of reachable idea, will be to develop that model or that idea and concept and thinking, how can we apply this therapeutically? What are the therapeutic uses of some of these things? Um, there's a couple of intermediate steps, so that's more of a distant idea, but then there's a couple of things in between that, including like the gamifying life is part of that reachable idea, right? And so everything just kind of builds. So as I do one session, I'm already kind of inching my way towards the next thing in line. Um, that's partly because that's my job now. I have to do this. But it's also just a good way of thinking like, okay, how can I kind of maintain that interest, right, in the work that I'm doing? So, Rebecca constantly developing programs, Steve learning new administrative tools, right? Dorothy working in, supervisory roles and developing conflict management. Denisha facing new challenges as we deal with more children who have lost parents because of the opioid epidemic, those kinds of things, right? That kind of complex trauma stuff, right? All of those things we can kind of start seeing a kind of pattern in the presentations and the work we do. So it's not always a case of, oh no, what am I going to do? It's almost like the one idea can kind of lead to the next, as well as all of the brainstorming stuff. All right. Any questions on that stuff? So I'm going to move on to norming. Norming is really kind of fleshing this out, right? It is filling out the application and putting the detail in, because it's all fair and good to say, oh, I have an idea. I'm going to do a session on unicorn hunting. Right, good. I'm glad Steve appreciates that. We're gonna do a session on unicorn hunting. It's not as brutal as it sounds. Essentially, it's a new program I've created wherein people go around our facility and there are QR codes on various walls, and if they walk past one of those QR codes with their portable device and they scan it, they might find a unicorn, but if they find a dragon, they lose a point. So they're going to go unicorn hunting, and I can change those QR codes because I just put them up on monitors, all right? Whatever. Feel free to steal that idea, Rebecca. Um, so anyway, that's my top of the hat idea, but I want to do a presentation on that. But there's certain details I need, right? Having that just concept isn't enough. So this is where the application form comes in. And that's why I'm norming this. This is like where things start to get settled and figured out, right? So what things do we need to have? And we can use the application form to really help shape how we view that final presentation. So this is the gamification application I submitted this year. I submitted to myself this year, I guess. I've been doing that a lot lately. I need to get a new hobby. But I want to just kind of share. So these forms are actually really simple. They are fairly similar across TR conferences. Um, they have a varying degree of expectation. So if you're doing research sessions, they often require more of an abstract, and there'll be specific guidelines for that. But a lot of the information is going to be very similar in terms of what it's asking for in terms of the NCTRC approval process, right? So you should always need to put your name and some kind of contact information in here. That's kind of standard. Titles, typically 20 words or less. Keep them short, but kind of descriptive. Again, I'm kind of teaching you all to suck eggs on this one, I feel. But in this case, we're going to be talking about, you can all see this, but this is like a hero quest deck, and we're going to be talking about these kinds of things along with adventure books and stuff like that. And we're going to be talking about the old kind of choose your own adventure books and how we're now starting to do this kind of gamifying life and choose your own adventure through life. So that's the title. Choose your own adventure gamification in RT practice. Like, how do we gamify life to make it more interesting for people who maybe haven't left the facility in 5 years? Right? How can we kind of enhance their enjoyment of the things they're doing? Oops. I'm just trying to scroll down on a document and I scrolled down on a presentation instead. Session descriptions. I typically kind of start out, I kind of have a formula for doing this in that I kind of give a quick sentence that says, um, you know, what is it that this topic is broadly about? So the first thing I do is talk about gamification. Then I talk about the session, and I just kind of talk about how we're gonna go, what we're gonna cover in the session. And I usually try and keep it to, it says 150 words. Typically, I try to aim for about 6 sentences. That's kind of it, right? So I kind of introduce the broad theme, then I kind of work through the basic steps of the session, and then I usually mention that we're going to talk about it and relate it to practice at the end. All right. Those things don't have to be like, you don't need to include citations. This is like how you're going to sell your thing, because this is what's going to go in a conference program. So if you want people to show up, make it sound fun. I don't know how you do that with like documentation sessions. I think the last time I did a documentation session, I had 2 people show up. So if anyone has, no, I mean, whatever. People would rather go painting or do drumming, right?
Offer food.
There you go. Canapes will be served because it's a professional session. Oops. All right. So next things, just gonna make sure I've got the next slide. Excuse me. So what instructional method are you going to use? So I tend to check multiple. There's always going to be some element of lecture, but I like discussion. I like interaction. And I usually like doing some kind of experiential. So in this case, we're doing those things. Panels work really well. They can be a nice way to facilitate a session without you putting a lot of work in. Just hint there. So at the Cortland Rec Conference, I set up a panel, I set up the questions, but the chair of the department is the host, and the rest of the faculty are the participants. So I actually get to kind of sit back, and they do all of the work, and then I just kind of run around and do other things. All right, so panels can be really good for that kind of stuff. If you're kind of happy at taking a back seat, or you want to bring in some new folks and get them used to being up front, right? As Rebecca was kind of inducted into the process, right? Level of presentation, what are you talking about? That's really what matters here. So in this case, we're talking about game theory and how it affects everyday life. That's pretty basic. We're not going to go into deep gaming theory. We're not going to be talking about binary code processing or anything like that. We're going to keep it very kind of 30,000 foot so that people can understand the process. Maybe for a session, like Steve was talking about, with more administrative stuff, maybe we're going to get really into the nitty gritty of Microsoft 365. Okay. I'm not sure that would reach the level of advanced. Not sure kind of what that would cover, but possibly intermediate. Like you should have some basic concept before we get into this more advanced stuff. Right. So that kind of thing there, it kind of matters in terms of, who's going to attend that session. But I will say this, most of the time that level of presentation doesn't get shared with anyone outside of NCTRC, right? It's not like we put this in the program. So if you're going to do something that's more advanced, I would always recommend that you put it into your session description, all right? Because that way people can read, oh, I need to have this kind of level of understanding. No guarantee that that's, who's going to show up, but at least you've kind of forewarned them. Next thing is learning outcomes. So by the end of this presentation, participants will be able to, I usually work rule of thumb, one outcome per half an hour of presentation. Right, so in this case, 90-minute presentation, one outcome per 30 minutes. Right, so 3 outcomes. You can do more than that, but the more you do, the more kind of condensed everything has to be to get there. Right, so that's why I usually go over half an hour rule. Um, Again, some of that might depend on how complex your session is going to be. Next one, session outline. They always ask for a breakdown, usually of minutes. This is how I do it. I've done it other ways in the past, but I like the kind of 1 to 5, 6 to 25, 26 to 40 kind of approach. It kind of keeps my tally running, so I know where I'm at as I'm planning my session. Always spend a couple of minutes at start introducing, right? Giving people a chance to kind of settle into the session. Always allow time at the end. And then use this to kind of guide how much content is going to go into your presentation. And we'll talk more about that in the next step. But knowing that gamification theory is basically 20 minutes of this session, right? I should have enough content for that 20 minutes. Equally, I need to make sure that the rest of this content fits with that timeline. I will note, despite the best efforts that you have, the chances are not always going to work out this way. By not always, I mean seldom, if ever. But at least having that in your mind as you're planning out those, your presentation will help in terms of that. Last part of the form, oh no, second to last part of the form, sorry. What kind of seating arrangement would you like? Most of the time, lecture and theater is fine, but if you're doing something that maybe involves drawing or painting, then classroom tables are useful. Circle sessions can be really effective, especially if you want to do movement sessions. So, Denisha, if you're thinking about doing any kind of movement, perhaps you would like a clear space or even a circle. So people can kind of see the demonstrations from all angles, that kind of thing. But really, it's what's going to work best for you. Right? Are you all kind of familiar with how these would look set up? I don't want to assume that you all do. All right, cool. So number of participants. The rooms have limited capacities. The only time you're going to want to limit attendance, so for the board game sessions that Steve and I have run, we've limited attendance because we needed to have a certain number of people there in order to play games, but we didn't want so many people that we ran out of games, right? So if you have sessions like that, if you know you're going to be doing something that has any kind of limited resource. So the horticulture session where you only have so many plants or whatever, that would be an opportunity to maybe limit the attendance to that session. From a marketing perspective, it also creates exclusivity. Just saying, sometimes that's a nice thing too. People feel special. Noise level, this actually is useful from a planning perspective. If you're going to be doing a drum circle and the room next to you is going to be doing a session on active grief, we need to kind of know that. We want to make sure that we plan appropriately and don't ever put those two sessions next to each other, right? And so that's where that part comes in. Time preference, that's for you. When do you like to present at sessions or conference? When's your preferred times?
Personally, I like to present like one of the first sessions in the morning because I just have a lot of anxiety and I overthink a lot. So if I know that it's going to get done with, and then I can enjoy like, the rest of the conference. But I know also like being like the first speakers isn't really the best because people might come late or, might not want to go to your early session. So it's always like an iffy with that. But I personally like the morning, one of the first sessions. So
Dorothy, what are you?
For preference, I could go either way. I think I like the afternoon because that way you can kind of use the morning to plan and like rehearse it in your head.
Okay. Denisha?
I think I'd have to go with either the morning, especially for movement, wake everybody up a little bit, or maybe like right after the lunch break, so it can serve kind of like an icebreaker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those movement sessions, they are nice after lunch. They get people up and re-engaged. So But yeah, the morning is good for that also. Steve?
I don't know that I have much of a preference. I feel like the ones that we've done in the afternoon have been nice because everyone's kind of settled in for the day. And then if there's any like technical issues that we need to kind of hash out, you have some hours to do so.
Mhm. Yeah, I used to be like Rebecca, get them out the way. Now at this point, it's just like whenever, especially because I'm often planning now. So often my sessions get plugged in, right? So wherever there's a gap or, where someone else can't go, then I go. So that's kind of how, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But now I still kind of like to get them out the way, if I'm honest. Earlier in the conference is better for me, just because I can then relax and enjoy the rest. But if I'm planning it, it doesn't matter, right? Last thing is, do you need any additional kind of AV equipment? I like the CD player, DVD player. Um, don't even know. DVD player, especially because that would probably now be a disk drive that would have to connect via USB to your laptop. Um, Generally speaking, people don't select any of that stuff. If they're planning videos now, they just, they have the videos already figured out. Same for music, it's just streaming now. But yeah, this little relic of the past still has use. It'll be there for a little while longer. Excuse me. Um, NYSTRA also has whether you'd be willing to share, like whether you'd have your session recorded, and whether we would be okay to share it later on for asynchronous sessions. There's no obligation to do that. You can absolutely say no, but they are there. And then the last part of this form is probably the most important in terms of continuing education. And that's making sure the NCTRC job analysis areas are figured out. Um, really only need to check one or two. See, I'm going to overachieve and I kind of check all over the place. But yeah, once you kind of know what you're going to be presenting on, where does it best fit? And that's all this is looking for. Right? And what happens is these applications all get submitted to NCTRC for approval, and they're the ones who ultimately decide whether they approve your session for continuing education or not. All right, so that's why that's useful. I'm conscious of time, and I know I'm over, so I'm going to quickly jump to the next thing, performing. This is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you take that application and you turn it into your PowerPoint, right? And then obviously you deliver that PowerPoint. So it's kind of two steps jammed in here. Audio visuals, I did email an audio visual, like a PowerPoint kind of cheat sheet, if you will, in terms of planning. I intentionally picked a font that was a little scrappy for this presentation. This is not a font I would have picked if I was doing this presentation on a projector, right? Because it tends to blur. And when you see like email addresses, I actually put them in a different font because they didn't look very clear. In this format where we're literally sat with the screen right in front of us is actually not a bad font, right? But making those kinds of choices is really important. Making sure you have a good contrast, all of those kinds of things we think about when we're producing materials for the folks we serve, we need to think about as well when we're doing our presentation. Less is more is my general rule of thumb to students. You don't need to have lots of animations. You don't need to have lots of sound effects. If you have a good, clear presentation, it will do the work for you. I don't think there is a single picture in here, right? That's not because I didn't think you were worth it. It's simply because I spend hours looking for pictures for my presentations and I just didn't have that kind of time. But don't fall into that trap. The substance is in the words you're using or the images you're using if they're telling a story. Steve, you had a hand up.
You have the NYSTRA logo, so you
I
just
do.
lied to
I
us.
actually designed this deck specifically. So this is actually a slide deck designed specifically for this. So I'm super nerdy with the NYSTRA stuff. But yeah, it's like it's on brand, right? It's like this is a NYSTRA presentation, therefore it's NYSTRA branded. So that's one thing I would say where you're using a slide deck. I like to kind of tailor the slide deck to what my content is. All right. There's no requirement to do that. It's just, I think it makes it visually more interesting. Right? But again, there's no obligation. If the content is good, you don't even need to do a PowerPoint. Marty Golub never uses PowerPoint. His sessions are always really well received. Right. So again, it does depend on your style. I like the PowerPoint. I like having the visual. I like having access to things like videos and sound and stuff like that. But everyone has their own preference. So I have provided you with, a presentation guide. If you're going to be using PowerPoint, kind of follow those rules. They're just kind of best practice things. Questions about performing before we jump onto that last part. What kind of things concern you about doing a session in front of people? Anything at this point? I think my biggest fear was people asking questions to which I didn't know the answers. And then I realized it's okay not to know the answers. Right? You can't possibly know. And sometimes it opens up an opportunity for the room to discuss. Right? So just having that's something that you just kind of learn with time. But that was certainly my biggest fear initially.
One of mine was pacing.
Mhm.
You schedule 90 minutes and you're done in 50 minutes. And you're kind of just sitting there like trying to come up with the content or stuff to present. So
Yeah, I'm usually the other way. In case you hadn't noticed as we run over with this session. Uh,
Mine is
any other?
stumbling over like my words and just, talking too fast or like, saying I know like that's like a really bad habit of mine. So stuff like that.
Mhm. And it's all normal. These are all normal fears, and I think we get so caught up in our own heads about this that it kind of puts us off. And yet every day, most of us are doing groups or presentations of some kind. And for some reason, it becomes different when we're doing that, when we're presenting that information to a group of peers. I'll put that in quotes, right? As opposed to patients. And so it's interesting how that kind of starts to become like its own barrier to doing this. But you've got this because you do this all the time, right? And you are the expert in this presentation, whatever it's on. Right? There might be someone who knows more about the Napoleonic Wars, but you're the one who knows about the Napoleonic Wars and how you use those to teach uh, everyday living skills to a group of at-risk youth, or whatever it is you're doing. I don't even know how that would look in practice. But I think that's kind of the first thing you have to kind of accept is you are the expert in what you're talking about. Right? Like you've bought this presentation, you've done the research, you've done the work. Anyone who wishes to share something else is going to add to your expertise. They're not a threat to it. And I think sometimes that's where that conflict kind of comes into our own heads. All right, last part, adjourning. So this is our reflective part. It's the evaluation, right? How did the session go? And I'm not talking about the evaluation sheets that people fill out, because 9 times out of 10, you either get all excellence or all rubbish and very little actual really good feedback. So how did the session go? How do you feel it went? Did your timing work? Did the audience participate? Did they laugh at some of your really bad jokes? Whatever it is that you hold up as a barometer of success, right? How did the session go? It's also worth having a few people in the room who you can kind of ask, what did you think of the session? Right? Steve's been in several of my sessions. I'm like, how was that? Right? He's usually fairly good at being honest with me, or he'll ask questions and stuff like that. So, invite people. If you have someone like a close friend or a colleague at the conference, invite them along and ask them, like, how did that go? It's always good to get that feedback from someone. All right. It's actually useful to you in a lot of ways. What worked for you, what didn't work, maybe the presentation didn't show up very well on the screen. There's like those environmental things. You don't always have control over the things that don't work. You can't control the temperature in a room. And honestly, if you're in a room full of people, some people in that room are going to be far too hot, and some people in that same room are going to be far too cold. You do not control it. So if that kind of feedback comes your way, brush it off. There's nothing you can do, right? One thing I do like to do is what are 3 takeaways that you have learned from this whole process, right? So, was this session a good idea? And I don't mean that in the broader sense, but like, did this topic actually make sense when I brought it out in front of people? Um, did the timing work? Did I spend enough time on the key things that we need to talk about? Um, that kind of stuff, right? Was there enough audience participation? Could I have done more? How would that have affected the session? Whatever that is, I like to do the 3 takeaways to myself so that I can do something different next time, or I can keep those things that worked really well, and then change the things that didn't. So 3 key takeaways is just a nice simple evaluation that you can do for yourself, and it doesn't require necessarily a lot of external feedback. All right. Questions, comments? All right. Any final questions or thoughts or concerns?
It was very helpful. Thank you so much, Jason.
You're welcome. The deadline for presentations, since we're at the Q&A bit, to be submitted is the end of the month, so January 31st. And at that point, that's like the last minute that we'll have to get everything to NCTRC to get everything approved in time. So January 31st is the deadline. If you are having any issues or struggles, like just thinking of ideas, or you want just someone to review your application or whatever, you can feel free to email it to either NYSTRA conference email or my work email, and I'll take a look at it. It's usually me who's going in there anyway, and ask any questions or whatever you need to do so we can get everything done. But I think the 4 of you have done this before. I don't expect you will have too many issues, but if anyone's watching online, like I say, that's how to get a hold of us, and we'll happily help. Even if you need some help brainstorming ideas you have or something like that, we're happy to help.
I thought for sure you're going to throw